I'm going to expound on what Governor Barker talked about when he started, about the difference between this type of an emergency and one that's normally covered under what's called the Stafford Act. The governor talked about the fact that this particular incident is covered under the Federal Oil Pollution Act of 1990. We're accustomed to dealing with emergencies when we have federal counterparts coming in under the Stafford Act. That's where the president declares a national disaster. And as such, he asked the governor to appoint a governor's authorized representative, who is the individual who's responsible for managing all the FEMA funds that come into the state, and also a state coordinating officer who works directly with his federal counterpart called the federal coordinating officer. This is not a Stafford Act emergency. FEMA has only a very small role in support of all the other federal agencies. We're executing our response to this consistent with our state comprehensive emergency management plan. This plan that was developed 30 years ago and is updated every 2 years. And under the plan, as the governor already talked about, the Department of Environmental Quality is the lead agency for this response. And Trudy Fisher, the executive director, is designated as the state's on-scene coordinator. And this on-scene coordinator is responsible for coordinating and providing technical assistance for all contamination, operations, cleanup, and contractor support inside what's called the exclusion area, or the hot zone. And the on-scene coordinator coordinates all on-scene activities with the principal primary party, the responsible party, in this case, British Petroleum. Trudy and her staff, along with Bill Walker and their staff, are doing direct coordination with not only BP, but also with the Coast Guard and Department of Environmental Quality and about another 40 or 50 federal agencies. Now, what is MEMA's role in this? Again, consistent with our state plan, MEMA, in conjunction with local authorities, coordinates all emergency support functions outside the boundary or exclusion area. Such functions include security of the area, monitoring, shelter measures, coordination of evacuation efforts, public information, warning statements, and logistical requirements for the on-scene commander. Now, there's been no impacts outside of the exclusion zone or the hot zone. There have been very few impacts in the hot zone, as the governor's already talked about. So MEMA's role in this incident, in this phase of the incident, is to be in support of the Department of Environmental Quality and the Department of Marine Resources. In doing so, we were asked to do three things initially: to assist in the flow of information down to local governments and back up, to assist in the coordination of public information, and to coordinate the activities of volunteers, or those people wishing to volunteer. And we worked with the Mississippi Commission for Volunteer Services and the State Veterinarian's Office and other state agencies to try to identify what volunteers can do, get them the proper training, and then make sure they were utilized effectively. Most of you are accustomed to the State Emergency Operations Center, and normally when we have an emergency, that's where we bring in all critical state agencies to do the coordination. It made no sense to stand up the State Emergency Operations Center in Pearl, Mississippi, when in fact the incident was on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, and the federal response was being coordinated out of both Biloxi and out of Mobile. We did in fact have a meeting of all emergency coordinating officers for all the primary agencies. We discussed it when this thing first started, and we told them if in fact we needed the resources, we would let them know. In the first 3 weeks of the response, there were approximately 20 staff members from MEMA that were in various positions along the Mississippi Gulf Coast in conjunction with this incident. That was at the same time we were in the recovery for first the response and then recovery for the tornadoes in central Mississippi and then the flooding of tornadoes in north Mississippi. At that time, the agency was in fact very stretched, but we have been able to pull staff from those two incidences in central and north Mississippi as a large part of the work has been completed. And at this point, we're able to sustain operations on a 24/7 if needed for the next 6 months if needed. Right now, we have 2 people in Mobile. We have 3 people in the Biloxi Area Coordinating Center with DEQ, DMR, and the National Guard. We have 1 each in each of the 3 coastal counties, and then we have an overall supervisor. I'm down there about 50% of my time, but time I'm down there and work with Katrina recovery issues as well. So the work of the agency goes on. And I will say this, I think that in many cases, local governments, their focus has been pulled away from other things like Katrina recovery because of the oil spill. It did impact my agency slightly in the first few weeks, but that's no longer the case. All of my staff is now back devoted to the Katrina recovery efforts, and we shouldn't see any problems with that. I would make one point about this. At the county and city level, there's no real equivalent to environmental quality or DEQ or DMR. Therefore, in some cases, the responsibilities fall to the emergency management director to do coordination. So you have a structure where the information flow comes up to the county emergency management director, and then instead of interfacing directly with Mema, as he or she usually does, they're now interfacing with DEQ, DMR, BP, and the Coast Guard. In addition to the Mema employee that's in each one of the county EOCs, there's Coast Guard representatives, there's BP representatives, there's DMR, DEQ representatives. There's about to be community relations representatives provided through the Department of Homeland Security. So there's already a lot of people that are trying to coordinate with that county emergency management director and municipalities in the county. I would say this, Mema is very much looking at what could come next, what's the worst case scenario. We all know that we have tropical systems. We're looking at how would we respond differently, how would we recover differently. We have a tropical system and the oil spill impacted that. These issues are being looked at on a national level. They're also being looked at by my counterparts in other coastal states. So we will have guidance to everyone as to how we do things differently in a tropical system that the oil might impact us. But I will just say this, from what I've heard from the scientists so far, it's not going to be substantially different. We have hazardous materials that are part of the mix of any storm surge. It could potentially be greater in this particular season, but we've dealt with it before, and